the biggest black nation in the world, ought to have a very strong economy capable of employing almost all employable citizens. Richly endowed with natural gas, petroleum, tin, iron ore, coal, limestone, arable land, and many other natural resources, yet our citizens struggle with unemployment.
Youth unemployment, in my opinion, is a cancer that has eaten deep into our society. My belief is that to solve this problem, that we need to go towards entrepreneurship.
Youth unemployment in Nigeria is a big problem. In fact, it can be described as a time bomb, which the federal government and our development partners need to urgently address.
No society that leaves a significant number of its people behind can prosper in a sustainable manner. What the challenge of development really is a challenge of opportunities being open to all.
The problem of youth unemployment in Nigeria is very alarming. According to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics report for the first quarter of 2016, unemployment and underemployment was highest for persons in the labor force between the ages of 15 to 34 years, which represents the youth population.
CVL is involved in a program of empowering 100 young people in the Ajegunle area to be entrepreneurs, to be people who create value, create wealth for their own good and for the benefit of general economy. For very clear and specific reasons, no society that leaves a significant number of its people behind can prosper in a sustainable manner. What the challenge of development really is a challenge of opportunities being open to all. And there can be demographic challenges to having opportunity open to all. And so certain parts of town that are quote unquote down the socio-economic ladder tend to get left behind. And because of this, we have been focused on Ajegunle for a very long time. Many years ago, I, as an individual working with another initiative, the Paradigm Initiative Nigeria, Benga Sheson, was involved in an Ajegunle project that took young people, provided them IT skills, and many escaped the neighborhood through that program. I know the British High Commission is particularly proud of one or two who, through placements in the British High Commission, continue to work even for the British High Commission till date, not just in Lagos but in Abuja. And so this passion to work with the people of that area has remained. We have had CVL initiatives with DFID, which we provided water, boreholes, and running water for parts of the community. And so when the need to help build a whole new generation of entrepreneurs for our country so that we can prosper came up, Ajegunle was a natural. And finding partners like Citibank Foundation and all of that was just greater impetus for going in to create more opportunities for more of the citizens.
The unemployment rate for those within the ages of 15 to 24 was at 21.5% in the first quarter of 2016, from 19% of the fourth quarter of 2015 and 17.8% in the third quarter of 2015. For those in the labor force within the ages of 25 to 34, Unemployment rose to 12.9% in the first quarter of 2016 from 11.4% in the fourth quarter of 2015. The Center for Values and Leadership Young Entrepreneurship Training Program is a one-year project funded by CVL Partners. It is an intensive entrepreneurship development program initiated for youths in Nigeria between the ages of 18 to 35 years to provide them with business support such as technical know-how, business information, startups, and access to financial links. It is intended to enhance the capacity of community-based youths who run small businesses or have the intention to own and run sustainable enterprises. Target beneficiaries are youths living in densely populated slums and poor neighborhoods in Nigeria. Our overall goal is to reduce youth unemployment in Nigeria through capacity building in entrepreneurship. The CVL Young Entrepreneurship Training Program kicked off with a process of selection of participants. A call for application for participants is issued to the general public. Completed application forms are returned and shortlisted applicants are notified. First stage interview is conducted following screening of qualified candidates. Final interview is conducted to select final participants. Participants undergo 2 months entrepreneurship training, followed by 2 months business mentoring sessions. A graduation ceremony is organized to award certificates and startup kits/grants to successful participants. A 6 months technical support in terms of intensive monitoring and supervision is also provided after the graduation ceremony.
In the course of the program, I've been able to study where I want my business to run. And I've also been able to study bookkeeping, that is how to record the profit and loss I have in the business. And also in the course of the program, I've also been able to know how to market, how to communicate with people.
This program has really helped me a lot. I learned so much. I think I've been able to learn about more of marketing, budgeting, and accounting. With this, I've been empowered. I'm going to start up my own business.
This program, the CVL Young Entrepreneurship Training, I would say it's a very good program that has come to Ajegule, and my prayer is that this comes to stay, because it's a very good program that has come to help several of us, and I can say that I am a living testimony, to which I pray that this continues, because it's going to help many people in Ajegule and the nation as a whole.
CVL Young Entrepreneurship Training Program, it is a program that I would advise anybody that has the opportunity to partake in, because it has actually taken me from the unknown to the known. Some things that I actually took for granted, I actually saw how important it is supposed to be. What I'm supposed to do to make me a successful person.
The CVL Young Entrepreneurship Training Program is a great initiative. It has helped me to broaden my knowledge on the subject of entrepreneurship. Also, it has helped me to identify my hidden potential to be an outstanding entrepreneur. I've been able to understand the difference between an entrepreneur and a business person or a business owner. Also, I've been able to know how to be faithful to my bookkeeping and other, principles guiding an entrepreneur. I'm also going to say that it has helped me to be able to identify opportunity. It has also helped me to creatively gather resources in order for me to set up my enterprise.
And I think another reason to really look at this is an understanding that the development process is such that it is a partnership, a tripartite partnership between government, private sector, and social enterprise, non-state actors. Increasingly, given the weakness of government, non-state actors have to fill more the gap, and this is what CVL is trying to do by working in the Ajegunda area to empower young people?
I mentored 7. My experience quite interesting, stressful. At the end of the day, I was happy I was part of the mentors. Some are willing to learn, some know it all. They don't like listening, they are not just good listeners. And some are there to learn, some are really ready to learn. Some go to the length of paying sacrifice so that the program can keep going on without it being stopping halfway. So that's my experience. And I enjoyed it in a little way because some of them give me the will, the drive to continue with them. Why some, you want to feel reluctant or pushing on. But when you see them around, Mama, what do you have for us? What is the next on the ground? So it gives me the drive to continue with them.
Now, Heritage Bank had decided to support this initiative. At the back of the bank's creed, we are generally poised to create wealth, preserve wealth, and transform. Now, this is one initiative that we're desirous of partnering, amongst others that we've done in several spheres and with several organizations. We've partnered with Nigerian Youth Service Corps in empowering young graduates who have just graduated. We've partnered in other schemes concerning development of businesses. Now, we've seen this initiative with CVL, right? And we've said, look, this brainchild of Professor Patutomi, we are interested in partnering. What it does is to show that even beyond government's intervention, private entities can support empowering our young youths. So we feel this is something that we can work with. It ties into our vision of growing businesses, transform them into entrepreneurs, and ensure that those businesses that have been grown and the values derived from it are preserved and even transferred beyond this current generation.
Well, I think the message that we should send out from here is that we can change the world. You know, many years ago, Margaret Mead made that powerful statement that we should not underestimate what a few thoughtful individuals can do to change the world. Because indeed, it's the only thing that really has changed the world. A few thoughtful individuals. We're hoping that the work that we do, the few, will change our world. Why don't you be one of those few? It can be changed Nigeria writ large, and it can be a better world. Rid of the violence of those who are angry with the system that has left them behind.
Watch out for the next edition of CVL Young Entrepreneurship Training Program. We may hit your community soon. For enquiries and more information, visit www.cvl.com.ng or contact Uchenna 234-803-583-2096, you Achunine at cvl.com.ng, or James on 234-814-628-6645, J. Ebube at cvl.com.ng.
Good afternoon and welcome. It is a great pleasure again to be able to moderate this panel of eminent persons engaged with a process that we at CVL are extremely proud of, the Nigeria History Series. As is the tradition, let me say a few words by way of welcome. And these words today focus on the fact that we live in a country that is under a lot of pressure from unemployment. The latest figures we have suggests that we're dealing with 33% unemployment. Youth unemployment would probably go as close as 50%. And this is frightening. Possibilities of solution are all around us. And one clear such possibility is the growth of manufacturing value chains. And so I am honored that CVL, in taking on the Nigeria History Series, which takes different sectors of Nigerian life and engaged in decision-making through the evolution of those sectors in Nigerian history to help us navigate the way things were, what went wrong, what went right, what could get us better to the path of travel that we desire. Now, today we continue for the fourth or so in the series on manufacturing. In looking at linkages, last fortnight we had some very eminent leaders from the history of manufacturing in Nigeria. One of those eminent leaders, Dr. Felix Ohiwere, said a number of very thoughtful and soul-searching inspiration things about the kind of progress that we have, or we had made, in trying to bring linkages that would make manufacturing more competitive with the pressures to backwardly integrate in the old import substitution industrialization strategy that we had adopted, of course, largely influenced by the work of Arthur Lewis in the Gold Coast and Pastor Kiwu and others who would advise Prime Minister Balewa. And anyhow, we found that a lot of effort, through careful planning actually, were made during the Babangida years with structural adjustment and all of that to get manufacturing to be deeply rooted. But then inconsistencies in policies sabotaged many of those goals. Today we want to continue this conversation. We have the good fortune of having with us, and I can see him already, Chief Osunkeye. We have, of course, the bios of our very distinguished panelists already, but we know that Chief Osunkeye was Chief Executive of Nestle at a time when, in my view, the food and beverages sector showed the possibilities of what could happen in manufacturing. And so the benefit of the choices that were made at that time is very, very important. We have also with us Professor Gloria Elemo, who was at FIIR, for many, many years. Now, FIIR or FIIR, depending on how we prefer to pronounce it, was the government initiative as part of this whole broad planning to help the research space in terms of industrialization and how we can implement the benefits of research locally, backward integration in industry. We do have joining us Chief Kola Jamodu. Chief Jamodu, not only CEO at that time at PZ Industries, he has served also as chair of the board for both Nigerian breweries and PZ, served as minister for industries, and so on. We also have Dr. Remi Aribisala, who was at the Raw Materials Research and Development Council and the Ministry of Industries, and was very critical in some of the policy efforts to get backward integration to happen. Let me begin with Chief Osunkeye. Chief, welcome. Maybe you need to unmute so we can hear you.
Thank you for.
Oh, lovely. It's good. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
You know, I had the good fortune of being around on the National Council of Man during those years as we battled building linkages and therefore making manufacturing in Nigeria more competitive. In your opinion, what were the biggest challenges to essentially creating these linkages to ensure that raw materials could be supplied locally and that we could be competitive both in the local distribution of what we produce and possibly even export?
Thank you. I will speak from my own experience largely from Nestle. Nigeria as a country, we are not competitive. But that does not mean that we cannot, within our own country, within our own competition in the country, be efficient. In the case of Nestle, we started out originally by importing finished goods. Then we started manufacturing in Nigeria. We were helped in our decision-making by the government in 1985 and 1986 through the import licensing era, where every company had to have import license in order to get foreign exchange, in order to import raw materials. That spurred Nestle to think of backward integration. And in the case of Nestle, like many other companies at that time, we went into farming. And I think Nigerian breweries, Guinness, many companies went into farming. Flour mills, just try to remember, many, even though they did not require or need anything from the farm. I remember Cable Metal also going into farming because you have to show you have a farm in order to get import license. And when you get the import license, the banks can then give you foreign exchange to the value shown on the license. So many companies who had nothing to do with agriculture went into farming. Having said that, many companies also quickly withdrew from farming because farming, agriculture is a difficult terrain. And yet, without agriculture, there can be no food security in a country. So in the case of Nestle, we then took the decision to do backward integration in the real sense. One of the initial challenges was that Nigeria is a big market. And because we were importing from other countries, we were sustaining the employment in those countries. And therefore, companies abroad will find it difficult to support local backward integration programs. That is the first challenge, because it meant that if you succeed in your agricultural program in Nigeria, some factories will have to close in Europe, perhaps. In the case of Nestle, that is what happened. We had to close 2 factories. when we started backward integration, we started yielding the yield from our farm. We were producing grains, maize, sorghum, and soya beans for our raw materials. Now, second point is it is very expensive to produce in Nigeria. In our own case, we went for 1,000 hectare farm in Kaduna State. If you are to get a large size area or land area of 1,000 hectares, you don't get that in the cities. It is right in the forest, in the jungle. In our own case, we had to go into Kaduna State, and on the road between Kaduna and Abuja, on kilometer 34, we have to veer left. And then you go 16 kilometers into the jungle in order to get land. Now, there was no road to the farm. So we started by having to construct a road. Remember, every kobo, every penny you spend on constructing the road or whatever is a cost that finally goes into the cost of the product. And therefore, local manufacturing was expensive. But then we are talking of food security. So if all companies in Nigeria then had backward integration, it does not matter if we are not efficient versus competition abroad. You have to have your internal efficiency, which is what Nestle went for. The second thing is to adapt to the local conditions and the local terrain, and in marketing area, to the local taste of Nigeria. For instance, when we were producing Cerelac, a baby-winning cereal food, before then, it was Cerelac made with wheat, which wheat is imported from Europe. But because we cannot grow wheat economically efficiently in Nigeria, Nestle decided to go for Cerelac with maize. The two are subject to technology, equally nutritious. But of course, changing the taste of the consumer from Cerelac wheat to Cerelac maize was difficult. Same thing with our seasoning cubes. The seasoning cubes, the concentrate was from Europe, temperate climate. We had to change our seasoning cubes to what we can get in Nigeria locally, and that is soya beans. And to change that and the taste, again, is another challenge. So overall, we have overcome. But it means determination, it means leadership, it means commitment. And initial cost profile came down with volume. And today we are reaping the benefits. So it's a long haul. That's what I would say. It's a long haul. Yes. And secondly, before I just round up, land clearing took over a year. And it took hundreds of millions of naira. So when we talk of agriculture, we're not talking of 2 acres, 5 acres. If you want large-scale farming, you have to first of all clear the land. And to clear the land needs investment in machinery, in equipment, and also in people. And then you have to be patient. To clear land of 1,000 hectares took us years to do. But at the end of the day, talking years and years and years later, Nigeria is the better for it, and Nestle Nigeria in particular is reaping the reward today.
Yeah, it shows clearly that the idea was not misplaced at all. But reflecting back, do you think there could have been ways that entry into that whole territory could have been more efficient, and you could have become much more competitive very quickly? I just give you a small example that I was personally involved with. There was AFCOT, was a cotton initiative by AFPrint, and they had invested so much money. They brought in aircraft from South Africa to spray the fields. They brought in very high tech, and they were losing a lot of money, and they were kind of quite frustrated. Now, the CEO at the time was a friend who often called me to ask my impression of this or that. And one day I remember suggesting to them to look at what Nigerian Tobacco Company, NTC, had done with these house grower schemes and all of that, where maybe they could be more effective than the way they were going about it. And I was amused 2 or 3 years later when he sent me their annual report, in which he was suggesting that the biggest number of people who went on pilgrimage to Mecca from that part of the country were their farmers. They had turned to this model that NTC had developed quite effectively in tobacco growing, and it worked for them. So thinking generally, instead of all the companies going in and setting up farms that they ran themselves with the many frustrations, could there have been more cooperative strategies in which the farmers, the companies didn't become necessarily the farmers themselves, but they could have grown a huge agri sector in terms of support to other producers?
Yes, the answer is yes. And that is what eventually Nestle did. When we started our 1,000-hectare farm, we also complemented with outgrower scheme. We were using our farm as a model farm. We brought farmers mostly from the northern part of the country because that's where we get more soya beans and sorghum. We brought them to our own farm to show them best practice. And we trained, during my time, 70 farmers. Eventually, we could not compete as agriculturally as farmers. When I say we, Nestle is a manufacturing company to convert perishable raw materials into wholesome food for the populace who are not in farming. We could not compete. So we then trained outgrowers, and they were supplying us. And I'm happy to say, if you look at the financial statement of Nestle, 2019, 46,000 farmers who have been empowered by Nestle Nigeria to improve quality and productivity of their produce in the last 3 years. So Nestle is working with at least 46,000 farmers. You can call them the outgrower scheme for Nestle. We have since abandoned the farming after 10 years of trying it out, and we found it so expensive because the standards that we will apply are expensive, but we can have many local farmers who will equally supply produce to us. Then we train them, we empower them to improve their productivity. And that is what is happening now. So to answer your question in a nutshell, we could have done it initially by having outgrower scheme, but it is good we had the experience ourselves so that we could bring them in to see what good practice and best practice is. I believe our universities of agriculture, I think we have at least 3, Abeokuta, Omu, DK, and I think Makurdi, should be doing this outgrower scheme for a lot of farmers in their catchment area. We will benefit in the long run.
It really brings me to another very important point in this conversation, which is the link between the universities, the science and tech, if you will, institutions created by government, and how we get the private sector to get optimum benefit. And here's where I'll turn to both Dr. Aribisala and then to Professor Elemo, because the Raw Materials Research and Development Council carried out a lot of studies at the time with a view to identifying what were the locations with endowments for particular raw materials and developing a strategy for making those raw materials available to go into industry. Perhaps Dr. Aribisala, if you can refresh us on what was done. I remember huge compendiums of these research that were done and location of all of these endowments and sources of raw materials. How far did that whole study go, and why did the pipeline not drive the intended push for manufacturing value chains based on those raw materials? Unmute, please.
Okay.
All right, lovely.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be on the panel, and I recognize all the panelists, Chief Osunkeye. I also use this time to say one of the things I expected that would come out, that he probably would have mentioned, was the close working relationship between Nestle that time and the Raw Material Research and Development Council. But going back to the question, or I would say the area that we'll be discussing, I think it probably would be clearer if we're able to step backwards a bit, because jumping into what was achieved, I mean, like I said last week, I said Raw Material Research and Development Council was not a baby of government. It was the request made by the Manufacturers Association that led to the establishment of Raw Material Research and Development Council. And even Manufacturer Association helped government to identify where to source the funding for the council. And that was 1% import surcharge. Then there was 7% import surcharge on any good imported into Nigeria. So I would say raw material was well funded. And what we met on ground, I would say was hostile. Hostile because of the regulation that was on at that particular time. Regulation as it regards most especially import license. So it was the era of backward integration, deletion program, and many other programs. But one of the areas of intervention of raw material, of the Raw Material Research and Development Council. Let me just also go down back a bit for us to get a clear understanding of where we intervened that led to all this documentation and compendium you wanted us to throw some information on. What we met on ground, there was the input supply sector. And those were the people, there were many arable research institutes, domestic with affiliation with international research institutes, the IARC, IITA, so many of those funds. And we regarded those funds as the input supply to support what was happening in the country at that period. Then we had the production sector, and they all had their challenges. Production, frequent pest disease attack, irrigation, low utilization of mechanized tools, like Chief Osunkeye, like you mentioned, like Professor Pat mentioned, the cutting, ascot. I knew about the case. You know, the cost of the aircraft flown in not once, not twice. Of course, we render the products, the project unviable. Then we have the processing. I'm happy Professor Gloria Elemo is also here. I also acknowledge her. She actually started in raw material. So it was not strange that she found herself in. She spent more years in raw material than FIIR. But that actually shows some of the integration and linkages, that happened during that period, because that actually was the processing. And that processing for manufacturers, high cost of power generation, high cost of processing equipment, non-competitiveness, the non-conducive environment, limited storage facilities, inadequate skilled personnel, and then of course, the worst, marketing and trade, illegal food imports competing with those things that were produced, poor road network, low cost of imported agricultural products, inadequate market information. But then government now had regulators. Agric was regulating, Standard Organization regulating, Food and Drug Regulation regulating. I happened to work in Food and Drug. In fact, that was the first time I met you for Osunkeye. I worked in the regulatory department. And we had the finance institutions, we had BOA, a Bank of Agriculture, that one that probably died in Kaduna now, Bank of Industry, BOI, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, commercial banks, private equity, so many organizations on ground. But poor infrastructure continued, low extension services. You remember then we also had agricultural extension services. Inadequate skilled personnel continue, inadequate research, low funding, weak institution, limited storage, and those were the areas of intervention of raw material that had the fund. So with the fund, we divided the manufacturing sector into 10 multidisciplinary sectors and work closely. In fact, hand in hand, all hands on deck. PZ, I'm also happy I saw Chief Jamodu entered in. I mean, we had so much close work because raw material wouldn't have succeeded. Without government, we had the years of government, all the presidents attended all the expo. I just had to tell any president or head of state, this is the need of raw material. They run and rush to ensure that we're able to meet the demands of
but with all of this, why was there such a challenge of coordination between all these agencies of government, which sometimes led to sub-optimization? I just threw a couple of examples that you can pull it all together. One classic challenge was the fact that we had at that time a certain agency of government called Productivities, Prices, and Incomes Board. It was the price control agency. And they determined the price of products that companies manufactured. And many times the outcome of their work and the reality of what companies had were clashing. Sometimes some regulators took positions that were opposite to the ones taken by other regulators, all supposed to be regulating the same manufacturers. With the benefit of hindsight, how could we have managed differently the coordination of different agencies of government all trying to achieve one goal?
Yeah, there were two problems from government side. One was policy, and we discussed that area I believe 2 weeks ago. The second one, regulators, and that problem still exists up to now. Any company will have like 10 regulators from Lagos State, parking lots, radio license, this. I mean, is why government continue to do that. To me, it's an issue that needed to be addressed very aggressively. It's an area that requires. You see, there's something about liberalization that African countries are afraid of. I saw that when I was in ECOWAS, liberalizing the air, liberalizing. We have the protocols on ground. So too many protocols, too many policies, but implementations, there are flaws. There are flaws because the regulators and the policy makers are the ones that do not seem to understand the linkages. You see, the linkages, which, in global value chain, we all know global value chain is all about linkages. And I would say the problem we had then, which we are still having up to now, which have not also allowed us to be where we should be in global value chain, have to deal with linkages. Linking producers to, it's quite interesting because there was a documentation. I went back to look for something that FAO, UNIDO, all those organizations that we took part in then on value chain in Nigeria and failure. And the main issue discovered were communication issues. The private sector is going one way. You see, also, I was a bit privileged because I was a technocrat. I just found myself as an administrator, the political position, maybe one of the first few people to become federal PAMSEC as a technocrat. You see, administrators, yes, they are seasoned administrators, wonderful administrators. I believe they need a lot of backward, I'll call it backward integration into understanding the know-how of why the private sector does what it does, especially manufacturing. When you don't understand, ignorance in the know-how, do not allow policymakers to appreciate the cost of some of these things and some of the problems. But from what I've seen, if you are talking of global value chain and linkages, that is the area I believe this could be corrected. We have enough research organizations, so I believe in that area we're okay with inputs. There was a time we had this land decree, what was it called? That was another problem with private sector. I'm surprised Chief Osunkeye, maybe Chief Jamodu will talk about that. It was a major problem. Land decree and the issues, tariff review board, another problem. So seedlings, agrochemicals, also remember fertilizer, importation, distribution, those were issues that government understand what they are doing. But what they are doing may not be in the best interest. I'm part of government, I'm not excluding myself. May not be in the best, I was then, in the best interest of the manufacturer. Then, of course, the cocoa farmers, that's a linkage because between those in production, those input, land, seedlings, agrochemical to cocoa farmers. Then between cocoa farmers, cooperatives, local buying agents, farm gates, clusters, we now enter processing. And then, of course, from there we go to merchants, processors, exports, local users like Nestle and others. They did beautifully well. Up to now, golden money is a hit. When people are traveling, they carry a whole suitcase of golden money. You make money from it. And I will still congratulate Chief Osunkeye. It happened during his time. So I believe the issue of policy is an issue of visionary. Of course, we had privileges of having enough information. We are on all international platforms. We have best practices report from all over the world. But maybe there are some interests that are not healthy to private sector. I'm talking of personal interest among sycophants, and those who have the ears of government. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so very much. It's important that you begin to unearth this, because part of the reason we have these conversations is so that the next generation of decision makers learn enough not to repeat some of those mistakes. Fortunately for us, we have with us in this conversation Dr. Eleazu. Dr. Eleazu, not only being the early director of MAN, but also from inside government was responsible for the policy center, the think tank in government. And it would be good for him to share some insights into why policy coordination has been such a problem, such that many times when good policy ideas are put on the table, it seems that regulators, policymakers tend to act in ways that are suboptimal. In fact, many times, as has happened in many critical projects, the reason for failure becomes government action. I mean, this is a critical variable in a framework for a book that I wrote on this back in the 90s, the predatory acts of government officials. What really is it that prevents us from being able to craft a policy environment in which this communication is bridged between the various policymakers and regulators, in which people take a more national, long-term best interest in the choices they make rather than power, personal power interests? Because it seems like many times power, personal power, drives the decision making, and it turns out to be suboptimal to where the country should be going. I mean, compare us to how decisions were made in China during the surge towards industrialization, or even in South Korea, the way Park, as president of South Korea, would work with different players to achieve a certain perspective planning goal, say, of becoming dominant shipbuilders in the world within 30 years. Dr. Eleazu?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be among these famous people. Some of them were my employer when I was with Manufacturers Association. Chief Osunkeye is there. Jamodu is there. Some of them moved and became Minister of Industries. Yeah, to come to your question, I'm basically on policies. I moved from government to the private sector to see how the private sector sees what the government is doing. Because while I was with the permanent secretaries and directors in the public sector, I discovered that they had a fixation about certain things. For example, as far as policy goes, we started on a wrong, well, not wrong, we started with the import substitution. It was the argument then that to develop industry, you have to begin with what you are importing. If you can substitute it, then that is how to grow. And that was what led companies like Chief Osunkeye's company to begin to go to farm. But at the time, when I met people in FIIR and they gave me what their own perspective about research and manufacturing, I also went to Proda and they gave me their perspective on research and manufacturing. Then we found that although you can, let's just take one, that soybean can produce raw materials. But if you plant soybeans, it is not immediately raw material for what they want to produce, because there are other ingredients and there are many processes that soybean from the farm will go through before it becomes the raw material that will produce the final good. Now, that is on that side. Now, also the permanent secretaries had in the public sector what they call the commanding heights of the economy, which they said only the government will climb up to those commanding heights. And it did not include private sector manufacturing. From there, if in the commanding heights, the argument went that if you have steel and you have petrochemicals, then industry will abound. And I'm sure most of you know the story of attempts to produce steel in Nigeria till today. Petrochemicals has the same story. My sister there, Remy, and the Raw Materials Development Council, when we requested that it should be done, we just wanted to know what are the minerals that are in this country that can be used. I went off to UNIDO to go and find out the processes through which raw material, what certain types of raw materials have to go through before they become inputs into, say, food and so on. And we got massive documentation of what UNIDO had developed. So the issue, I think, where we got it wrong is by not sitting down to do those things which government can do well, like creating an enabling environment in which private industries can start and prosper. 2, developing the human capital, which is the basis of competitiveness in the present day world. We missed those 2. Even though we have universities, most of our universities are like islands on themselves. The same thing moved into research institutes like FIIR, PRODA, and all this. They did not link immediately with industries. At one time, I have suggested that universities should be made to specialize in something. When I was dean of faculty in Institute of Management and Technology in Enugu, we decided that our lecturers have to go to Ministry of Communication, those who are dealing with that area. Others will place them like 2-3 years to have industry experience and then come back to teach, so that the lecturers themselves do not just come with plain theoretical knowledge of the thing. They talk about power systems, but when you say what is wrong with the turbine, which is at Egbin, they draw blank. So they cannot even repair it. So you say, okay. So in IMT, we started by getting everybody to know how to produce a motor. The drawing, you can put it apart, put it back together. I I remember one of the commissioners came and told us what we were doing was not what College of Technology was supposed to do, and that we should close it down. So what am I saying? We got it wrong at the beginning. I recently found a book by René Dumont. I'm sure Prof. Tommy knows about false start in Africa. If you read that book, you'll find that this is somebody who, I think he was an agronomist. And it talked about, although focused on mainly on French West Africa, you'll find that the same mistakes he discussed in his book is what why Nigeria failed in industrialization. The commanding heights that the government took over could not come on stream. And then
it's kind of reluctant to come in at that point because, you know, I actually wrote a PhD thesis around this subject and spent a lot of time with Chief Philip Asiodu, Alison Aida, the late Elemo, and all of them around 1980, 81. Essentially dealing with that whole approach. Now, the challenge starting from the choice of an import substitution industrialization strategy, the Prebisch thesis, which came out of the Economic Commission for Latin America. Arthur Lewis became the first black man to win the Nobel Prize in economics.
Exactly.
Essentially domesticated it with his work in Ghana, you know, industrialization in the Gold Coast. And I spent a lot of time with Dr. Pius Okibo dealing with that. Now, once that inspired Nigeria's approach to industrialization, another factor came in, which is what you were referring to. And that factor came with oil money beginning to enter Nigeria's pockets. And people like Chief Asiodu and co argued that the Nigerian private sector did not have the capacity to entrepreneurially go into large-scale production of anything. So that government needed to dominate the commanding heights of the economy. Now, people like Elemo, Asiodu, and others were significantly influenced by Harold Lasky at LSE. And that mixed economy idea, which oil revenues gave them greater confidence in, pushed that. And that created the idea of, let's do a Jaokuta, let's do this, let government determine how this happened. And that was the first false start, in my view. But that conversation needs to move forward because there were others who had similar views and still made progress in Southeast Asia before they moved into export-led industrialization. They still came down that same track and managed to gain traction. Let me talk to Professor Elemo to ask her what the critical issues were, and I'll use a specific example. There was a time when there was so much talk about backward integration with flour, bread production. It could be done with cassava, it could be done with corn. While all of that was going on, FIIR produced cassava bread. It was celebrated in the media and all of that. Now, it didn't quite become our staple. What was, if you will, not right about the nature of the collaboration between FIIR and the private sector to facilitate backward integration in manufacturing?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. I'm very happy to be on this platform and to actually thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm also very, very happy to be meeting on this same platform my daddies, Chief Olusegun, Osunkeye, and I have my mentor here with me, and that is Dr. Aribisala. I actually cut my teeth in the area of industrialization and commercialization of research results from her experience. She's my teacher, my mentor, my mommy. I'm happy to have her here. Thank you for bringing this opportunity. And Chief Jamodu, we've had the opportunity to interact while I was at the Federal Institute of Industrial Research. History will always come into play because if we look at what informed the establishment of FIIR in the first place, it is not as if government and Nigeria was not privy to the fact that there is need for research and development for any country to improve or to move industrially. And a research was done in 1953 by the Bank of Reconstruction then that came to Nigeria, and they found that Nigeria was not an industrialized nation simply because of the level of research and development. And that informed the establishment of the Federal Institute of Industrial Research in the first place. It took off in 1956 with just 260 pounds sterling there to start by the federal government of Nigeria. Today, with a strong mission to conduct and to provide and promote market-driven research for the industrialization and socioeconomic development of the nation, the Institute has done extensive work, but we need implementation strategies for it to get out there, and that entails a lot of fund. Number one, the area of entrepreneurship, which parts we've talked extensively on, and this is an area I know usually touches you extensively, and that is empowerment. We are looking at how to empower the youth. We started this platform by you giving statistics of the level of unemployment, even among the youth, going to about 50%, which is staring in the eye and staggering. And we're talking about insecurity in the country, when we have not been able to empower the youth. And these are all based on our policies, linkages. We're talking about upstreams and industrialization. So the first step, and one of the mandate given to FIIR there, was to look at the raw materials that were all in the country and come up to end product development for especially establishment of the small and medium scale industries, which it will be a platform and a sort of bedrock for industrialization using local content and also the result of research and development. And this FIIR has done extensively, and it has been able to actually spur the economy of this country in various areas. I will now come to the issue of the cassava bread you talked about. That is just one example. And that is an area where cassava, knowing that Nigeria is Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava, of being the first and the largest producer of cassava in the world. So how have we been using our cassava? Apart from domestic use, for production of gari, for fufu and the other things, industrially, we have not been able to utilize cassava effectively. And that was why it came to fore that there must be need to utilize cassava more industrially. And when the issue of substitution for wheat to reduce wheat importation into the country came into being, the cassava and so many other cereals were also looked at. But luckily, cassava, being an easier crop to cultivate, and it's a lot cheaper, had the upper hand. And if you look at it, there are so many misconstructions about cassava in itself, which research and development has debunked. At the Federal Institute of Industrial Research, a lot of research was done on cassava, especially with regards to the cyanide content. Now, it has been found that there are various processes using R&D there are various processes that can actually remove and reduce totally the cyanide content, and then that the cassava can be incorporated at any percentage level to produce bread, and that this bread is the same quality, if not better, and even health-wise, from research that has been done. We are looking at the GI, that is the glycemic index of the cassava bread and of the ordinary 100% wheat bread. And we find that relatively the cassava bread will definitely be a better option if we had pursued it to logical conclusion. Now, this research was done, and way back in 1964, there was linkage between the flour mills and the Federal Institute of Industrial Research with that result. And they came up and produced the first cassava bread in this country, which was in 1964. And so many governments has come in, and they have always been interested in the cassava bread. One, because it has the potentials of creating jobs along that value chain for cassava for almost 30 million jobs. Not only that, it's able to save the country a huge amount of investment in wheat bread. That is, substitution with 10% alone will save the country about 100, I'm not very sure of my figures, so let me know, but it's a huge amount, say about almost 160 million US dollars in terms of importation. If that alone is plowed back into research, I know where Nigeria should be today. And these implications, it will also drive the value chain in terms of production. And that was the struggle that we have been going through. And with FIIR, a number of research was coming up and development in how we can develop and utilize cassava maximally. Even at our investment forum, which we had in 2014, that was actually declared open by the president of the country himself, found extensively that we can make 100% cassava cake. And we made a 2-ton cassava cake, which was then used to open the ceremony. Now, how far have we gone? To pass into law the legislation that for every flour that we find in the Nigerian market, there must be at least 10% inclusion. It has been a Herculean task. And this issue and the promotion of cassava came up fully on board when our president, Olusegun, came to the Federal Institute of Industrial Research. And he physically ate the cassava bread. He started that cassava must be looked at holistically. And that is where we started. It has gone through National Assembly. It has been thrown out. One, because they felt it was going to.
Does it have to take law? If it is made commercially attractive, surely the private sector should be the one trying to grow more cassava and using more of it rather than importing wheat. Because I think that that is quite possible. If you look at many of the examples, I tell you, I give an example, flour mills of Nigeria, they produce Convita when the pressure for backward integration was on. Just like Chief Osunkeye was saying earlier, you know, many of these companies found, okay, originally they were multinationals, they came from abroad, they brought what they were doing here. Under a little pressure, they invested, and they found that it actually made them more competitive in terms of local production. That's why the food and beverages sector is thriving today. Now, what could we be doing instead? I was going to give you the example of Convita. Flour mills of Nigeria started this flour farm in Niger State, began to produce this thing called Convita. It was catching on. The market was going great. The moment the ban on wheat was lifted, they more or less abandoned Convita, which was gaining market share and acceptance. How can we make it commercially attractive rather than just a decree, a National Assembly? Maybe sometimes you need that, but most times You just need to make it more commercially attractive.
Yes, thank you very much. A lot of effort was put in that area to drive it from the private sector end. And a lot of sabotage was also seen in that area. I know flour mills and Honeywell's flour were part of the team that actually worked closely and even changed some of their machineries and equipment to accommodate cassava. But also it is very important that government is involved and is carried along in the area of policy. Policy, direction, policy, encouragement is very important in ensuring that we are able to optimally maximize our local raw materials. And several efforts, even the African Development Bank president today, when he was Minister for Agriculture, worked closely with the Federal Institute of Industrial Research. I was directly involved with working with him and trying all efforts to drive this process through the private sector and also through government. So it was a two-edged.
My point is simple. When Dr. Adesina was Minister of Agriculture, each time I visited him, he had to bring all the cassava bread to eat.
Yes.
We both happened to share the same birthday. So on one of our birthdays, CVL had the annual lecture. Adesina brought a truckload of bread to the event. He was the keynote speaker that year. Everybody who came, more than 300 people, went home with loaves of
cassava bread.
Bread. Why didn't nobody found anything wrong in eating it? It was nice. It tasted well. What was the incentive for commercial bread production to travel that way? Because sometimes maybe incentives work better.
Yes, when you talk about incentives, it is very important, and that is why we are saying government's assistance is also needed in being able to drive. The cassava bread issue has been driven maximally because there has been training of all the master bakers all over the country. There's no master baker that does not know the recipe of producing the 10 to 20% cassava inclusion bread. So they are all ready to absorb. Now another issue was coming up. The cassava flour itself for the inclusion was not readily available. And that's when I talk about policy. Government, the cassava farmers were encouraged, that is backward integration. They were encouraged to plant cassava extensively for the projected utilization for bread production. At the end of their production, there were no buyers. It is at this point we were expecting such assistance from government as absorbing all of what the farmers have, because the intermediate or the midstream industry was not ready, and that is producing high quality cassava flour for the use for bread production, because it has its own technicality. And this is where FIIR comes in. We have the technology to convert cassava into cassava flour for utilization. And this technology has been used for training so many people and the youth. And quite a number of people have actually trained, but where is the fund to establish the SMEs for this intermediate industry, even for the downstream industry, which is actually the bread production? So we have some of these challenges, we have some of these problems, and that is fun.
Dr. Aribisala talked about the import surcharge, which was a dedicated fund for this kind of activity. Why was FIIR not able to apply to such a fund to make commercial transitions more attractive because as we see, look, a multinational is a multinational. It has its interests from wherever it's coming from. But when it finds that it can actually make more profit locally by using that input, it will do it, as Chief Osunkeye indicated. So how do we use those kinds of funds like the import surcharge to facilitate this process so that they can make more profit from local inputs? It's not necessarily in their interest to bring it from abroad if they can do it much better locally and make more profits here. What's the policy challenge in getting institutions like FIIR to work?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof.
I think there is.
Sorry, Dr. Eleazu, you're going to say something? Sorry.
Yes, please. I think
Yes.
there is a need for specialization. FIIR is industrial research. They have brought their research up to a point. And then it is the time for the government now to understand what one institute has done and then make policies, the right kind of policies that will attract small and medium enterprises to take up from where research stops. I think where FIIR is now is the stage of commercialization of the research which has already been done, completed, and proved. So it is, the trouble again is because our governments don't do policy research as such. Because they are no longer doing policy research, some people will stay in the Ministry of Industry and collude with people who want wheat to come in, importers, you know. And so it's easier to give import license and for somebody to bring in wheat and take the rent out of it than to make policy that will now encourage the SMEs, you know, because all it requires is to popularize, like what you are doing in the entrepreneurship program. I mean, program. Yeah. So there are many of the youths who attend the program, but now they go through an entrepreneurship program. They say, "Oh, where do I start?" You know. So the problem still comes back to the lack of the right kind of policies on the part of the government.
Can I come in, please?
Yes, please. All right,
yes.
Come in, and then.
Yes. You see, the one thing what I would like to also say is that Sweden, we all know what Sweden is. When we talked about the small and medium scale, you see that during my own childhood, bread was brought in from Liverpool. We call it Shackleford bread, and that would have traveled to Nigeria by 2 weeks. But when Nigerian bread was being made, imported bread no longer viable. And I believe that there's still an ingredient needed, which India did for small businesses. And that ingredient is creating a fund that specifically assisted a startup. And not only startup, that's where clusters, that's where the issue of clusters came in such countries. Although with bread is localized production, but then there could still be something that enable quality control. It's not just giving them money, giving them equipment. There still has to be quality control. Yeah. And I believe this thing should be taken up at the local government level. When we are talking of policy, we are looking at Abuja. Abuja is not where we have to look. There's a lot of money in local government that nobody is asking how that money is being spent. And I believe that is where we have to look into. A conducive environment, those people may not have money to rent shop. After all, most bakers in Nigeria at that level, they don't require imported equipment. They do their own furnace. There's a baking furnace that they require. So
thank you.
That's to be addressed at the local government level. I remembered at a time from the 1% import surcharge, raw materials started what we called a joint venture, risk funding, and all the banks operated, central bank operated. And with that, we had this cashew share note, the industries, small businesses exporting cocoa powder, most of them researchers before, or so a lot of progress can be made if in commercializing research results. Number one, there has to be a pilot plant. And that pilot plant, like raw material call it catalytic model, is a model. And that's more or less should help the local government to be able to support training and support whatever is required for small businesses to go into that area. So when we are looking at policy, it's not Abuja policy, it's not state policy. This should be the responsibility of the local government.
Yeah, interestingly,
yes. Sorry if I can just come in there at that particular point. That efforts have been made in all of this area. Luckily with me here, I have a book which FIIR had already compiled. And this is a copy for those who are on screen. We have compiled a book which we call the Investment Opportunities for Job Creation. This is based on FIIR's research and development results. FIIR research and development results and available raw materials in all of the 774 local government areas in Nigeria. So we have come down to that level in which we've been able to identify the raw materials of interest, and technologies have been developed in those areas, right from the upstream to the downstream, and various products that can be developed from each raw materials of relative advantage based on FIIR technology. And this is a compilation. There is no local government in Nigeria that is not here, based on agro and even some mineral raw materials, but
you know,
only
Elemo,
for the technologies. Oh, you have the book. That's good. So
yes,
it's a sort of Bible for the...
Yeah, the thing is creating strategy. And that's really what the next episode, if you want to call it, 2 weeks from now, is trying to engage. We've got on that episode Dr. Kande Yunkela, who was Director General of UNIDO. And, you know, Kande, while he was at UNIDO, actually sponsored a study by Professor Collier, Paul Collier out of Oxford, to look at what China did that led to manufacturing jumping the way it did in China, and what Africa can learn from it. Now, clearly, there are issues of strategy. You know, FIIR has worked very hard at many things. Produces documents like you have there. I know when you published it, Rashida Degbenro came and got a copy for me and all of that. But the problem is, how do we take the idea of clusters to local governments and run it effectively? I mentioned in an earlier episode here, Babashola Chinsman, who was UNDP director here in Nigeria a couple of years ago, you know, said to me, look, they've worked this thing out. They've suggested it. China has taken theirs. The one in China and the one in Oshodi were opened the same week or something. Oshodi is still the only one in Nigeria when China reached 150. How do we really get policy to align with commerce? And this is, I'm coming back to Chief Osunkeye now. As someone who, by the way, apologies for Chief Jamodu, he had to drop out because something happened. So he'll join us in the next one. How do we, from your experience, from a big commercial perspective, how do we get these ideas to work? As you have said, the multinationals, Nestle, resisted when these policies were being pressured. Eventually, factories were shut down in Europe. But today, Nestle Nigeria and the Nestle group, for sure, is happier for the fact that we have domesticated, a good part of the food and beverages sector that it plays in. If you were going to make policy choice, what would you do to encourage an understanding of this process such that you can facilitate both acceptance on the part of the private sector, specific initiatives like the local government clusters that we talked about, and how government better appreciates how the private sector responds to incentives?
Am I?
Yes, Osunkeye, please.
Okay, thank you. I think I will start rather from saying that our youths should be encouraged to do agriculture. And to do agriculture, our youths should have basic education and skills to manipulate, to run equipment, because nowadays you can't do cutlass and hoe agriculture. It has to be mechanized farming. So our youth also, the attitude, nobody has mentioned attitude of our youth. I give an example, the farm we were running in Kaduna State. We have to have trucks to bring them from Kaduna City to the farm. Many of them, after 1 week of labor on the farm, do not show up because farming is too rigorous under the sun and all the rest. So we have to have attitudinal change in the minds of our youths. We must train them, we must educate them right from elementary school, secondary school, to have that attitude. Work ethics comes into play. Our universities of agriculture should do more to align and cooperate with industry, what industry wants. In Nestle, I encouraged that the University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, should have extension farms in their catchment area, which is almost the whole of Southwest Nigeria, and it worked. 500 farmers in Southwest Nigeria were producing soya beans to feed the Agwara factory. Soya bean is better cropped actually in the northern part of Nigeria because the sun comes out for many hours more, and therefore the drying of the soya beans is better for industry, because when you have too much moisture in the seeds, you have aflatoxin growth and so on. Now, at the local industry level, I think we should have incentives. Incentives such as tax holiday, even for small, medium enterprises. Tell them that for 5 years of production or 5 years of making profit, they will not pay any tax. I think that will go a long way. Cassava, in particular, is an area we should, as a country, have competitive advantage. And that can be done in most parts of the country to have cassava bread. Today, many of us talk of French bread, which is different from British bread, if I may be simplistic. But when you acquire the taste, it becomes the bread for Nigeria. We have to use what we have to produce what we want. Cassava can grow anywhere in Nigeria. So we should give encouragement and also policy consistency. If I use two companies in Nigeria, Presco, and I think it's the competitor, Presco, and I've gotten the name now.
Olam.
Olam and one Okomu. Okomu, yes. Now, if you study their activities and their accounts, they do well when the government bans import of vegetable oil. Then the influential importers go to the government, make a case, whatever it is, they lift the ban. And vegetable oil is then imported from Malaysia. And you then find Okomu and maybe Olam and Presco suffer because vegetable oil is being imported at lower prices because of the volume that Malaysia can produce. So there has to be incentive, there has to be policy consistency. When a policy is formulated, it takes time for industry to grow and get to cruising speed, as I will put it, and then begin to make profit. So you have to stay the course, not have policy for 2 years, somersault, and come back again. Nobody's interested in that sort of thing. So incentives, education, attitudinal change, very important for our youth. If you bring work now in agriculture and tell youth to come to the farm, they don't want to come. Therefore, we must enter their minds and change the attitude and improve the work ethics of our youth so that they can benefit and the country can benefit, especially for the small, medium enterprises, which is where our youth can do very, very well, leaving out the big companies to do their own thing. Cassava bread will not be produced by multinational companies. That is, the technology is basic, which is suitable for all the local governments, 774 local governments in Nigeria. Leave the big companies to apply high technology to transform raw materials into wholesome food with long shelf life, which is what the mission of Nestle is. It is high technology to be able to use soya beans and into seasoning. It is high technology to use soya beans as milk. Nestle could have done that if the economy was rising in Nigeria. I was in Malaysia when Nestle introduced, we call it bonus milk. It is milk produced solely from soya with all the protein content. So policy consistency again comes there. Leave the big companies to do what they know best to do and apply high technology, but our SMEs will be the bedrock of this country. We must focus on that, and to do that, let us go into the minds of our youths that hard work is involved, work ethics is involved, and of course, give them incentives. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's very important in talking incentives and all of that to raise a question. And by the way, those of us who would like to ask questions or make some important comment can indicate by raising their hands in the system. We'll get to you in the next 5 or so minutes. I'll call for some questions. But the big question, I mean, watch this. When we all started, we had some, I mean, I remember one famous Monday mornings on 20-something years ago, I stopped to see Aliko Dangote. He had just returned over the weekend from a trip to Brazil. And he was saying to me that, you know, he met this man in Brazil, said to him that, look, nobody really gets rich by buying and selling, that you must produce something that people need. And that he was going to make a transition into manufacturing. And it still seems like yesterday. Now, we've seen the dependence we had in cement on importation that created all kinds of things in our country. We had a cement armada. Ships were lined up for miles into the Atlantic, bringing cement into Nigeria. A famous permanent secretary, I think it was Damchida, lost his job on account of that crisis because it was said it was the military importing cement for barracks and all of that. But today, we are self-sufficient in cement production. What will it take to achieve in other manufacturing what has been achieved in cement? I don't know if we could start with some reflections from Dr. Eleazu. I mean, obviously, if it can be done with cement, it can be done in many other areas, and we can become net exporters of some of the things that we are importing today. What was done in cement that anybody remembers? Perhaps Dr. Aribisala also, and Professor Elemo, that can be done for other value chains?
Well, who is coming in first?
Okay, go ahead if you're ready.
Well, I would just want to limit myself to the area where I have some experience, because when I left raw material, I practicalized some of these things, and I will still go to the SME. And I've always said the Small Business Administration is the success of industrialization in the United States,
backbone.
as sophisticated
Every economy.
As sophisticated as United States is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still going back to the issue of that has succeeded in China. Cement cannot be produced, I remember one of the training we give women on entrepreneurship. The first 2 weeks, for them to make a list of what they, on their own basis, their family, themselves, and their friends buy. And that will help them to have an idea of the type of small business they want to go into. Whatever you are not buying, others are not buying. The masses are not buying. You need the critical masses. So I will still go back to small businesses. And what are the essential components of the support structure that they require? Some of these have been mentioned. Some FIIR have practiced with the breathing. But I'm still coming back to local government. You see, we cannot use Dangote cement industry in a comparative way. Because sometimes when you start a business, probably you've already raised a huge capital through other patronage or resources or trading. But these people still need financing. Financing is key. Capital is very key to them, even where knowledge exists or existed. So with the local government, the enabling environment, why are people running away to Lagos? Because state governments are not making their states enticing for the youth to stay. So it is very important that we take this in strategizing and in any advisory capacity we are going to use this forum for, to ensure that government empower or support the local government to provide enabling environment through appropriate policies and regulation, as well as number 2, vital infrastructure. I'm not talking of buying generators for them, but ensuring.
But even a cluster where you have one generator that can serve 30 of them, that is put together by the state government, and X3, whatever they need, that 50, 60 of them can be producing within that cluster, which also brings me to the role of universities and how we have so poorly utilized our university system. The takeoff of agriculture in the United States is very often credited to the land-grant universities. They became the base for agricultural extension services that drove agricultural growth in the United States of America. How can we link the universities, the FIIRs of this world, into a network that drives such clustering at local government levels that leads to industrial productivity in our country?
Yes. Thank you very much. That's a very important question, Pat. This industry, university, and research institutes linkage is very, very important. And it has been a bane for discussion severally in science and technology. We have what is known as the triple helix, where you have the industry, the university, and the research institute coming in, and the interaction. There is obviously broken links. I would like the industries. For instance, simple industry like, let's say, we have Dr. Chief Osunkeye here with us, and he has actually headed Nestle. How many of the technology that is produced has been taken up locally? FIIR is in the same zone with Nestle. What is the percentage of all of the huge technology, over 250 technologies in FIIR that is ready for commercialization, and all on the agro-based areas in the area of food, creating food security? How many of these technology has the industry, I just use Nestle as one, has it taken up? Chief also talked about the soya milk. Has Nestle come in to see the volume of the technology that is in the area of soya milk production and the various varieties that exist in FIIR? So you find that most of the research institutes do a lot of research work, but the uptakers, like the multinationals, have their in-house or their home research, and they do their own research in their home countries and only bring the result of the research results to be manufactured and produced and sold in Nigeria. Nigeria is a big market. So we have the market in Nigeria. But none of the technology is taken up for even the funds to be plowed back into the system. The universities, on the other hand, tend to concentrate more on basic research rather than market-driven research. And I think orientation is gradually changing because there is a lot of insistence now that there should be concentration on both basic and market-driven research for commercialization, especially now that the university is aware that they have a major problem. The large number of unemployed graduates, they have now included entrepreneurial and entrepreneurship program into their program. I, for one, tend to bring out research in areas where I have affiliation with the university for the final year student to do more research that actually are there that is market driven and can be meaningful given products which can actually be commercialized. So that link is missing, and that is why I will agree strongly with Dr. Aribisala on issue of policy. Government has to come strong that for the industries, they must be able to use the result of research results. Before I left FIIR, we have over 30 patents that are waiting to be bought off the shelves right now, but which industries are willing to? Even where some of the industries have picked up this technology, the policy and the fine-tuning are still at the rudimentary stage. These are areas where science and technology, and with the Minister for Science and Technology, Dr. Bunaya, on driving commercialization as a major focus and priority. These are areas, especially in the area of absorbing and taking the technology that has been developed. In FIIR, we have over 40 research results that is patented and ready actually for the market. So we need to encourage the industries and encourage also the SMEs. As we said, the SMEs are very, very important. We talked about industrial parks, and government has made efforts in trying to fund some of these SMEs. There are programs at the BOI, that is Bank of Industry. We have programs at Bank of Agriculture, where there are policies, there are grants being given, and there are conditions. Well, I think some of the conditionalities for assessing some of these loans should be looked into and be relaxed, because at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs we train
Elemo,
cannot meet.
My late friend, Professor Oye Ibidaku once led a committee that was trying to work at creating clusters of SMEs directly attached to particular large businesses. And I wonder, this is an entrepreneurial opportunity to actually get people who are, let's call them tech commercializers, who can go to a Nestle and say, these ideas can be inputs into what you need. You can go to a producer of motorcycles, whether it's Bajaj, rickshaw, whatever, and say these components can feed an aftermarket and feed into what you're doing. And there can be funds that can then be accessed to facilitate this clustering around inputs. I wonder if that is not something that policy can try to encourage through all kinds of incentives that can be offered. But while we're reflecting on that, let me invite one of the questions or raised hands from Babajide Elemo, and then Sambo Ingawa should be understand.
Thank you, Prof. I will say, let me start by saying one is privileged to join this platform. But I will say that apart from what Chief Osunkeye mentioned about changing, the attitude of youth, my worry is about the kind of personnel we have in our local governments. More so when virtually all local governments across Nigeria have a caretaker committee. And the kind of mindset in that place, we know about if it's tough for one to convince state governments to have what they call technology incubation centers. I mean, where these clusters can even, be seeded, in quote. At the local government level, you discover, like in my state, I'm from Ondo State, there was a time that I think the head of the commercial motorcyclists became the chairman of local government. I'm not saying that such a person cannot appreciate the need to invest. One, the funds don't get to the local government. So they can't be a very good platform for what we are envisaging. Secondly, I think even at the level of maybe NUC, because incidentally, we have some specialized universities, like we have technology universities, FIIR and co. Chief Osunkeye mentioned those of our Greek. We discovered that the technology universities are now going into law, building law faculties, going into medicine. So it means that in Nigeria, because we don't have policy research, according to Eleazu, we will keep going around in circles. I remember, let me use myself as an example. A couple of years back, I had my sabbatical in an industry. Then when I came back, I was being interviewed for a chair, and somebody said, is it because you can't get any university to absorb you? That's why you went to an industry. Whereas I became a better teacher to my students after that experience.
Yes.
I used to attack the industry for certain things they were doing. Of course, I had, as far back as 1983, I had in myself and my, supervisor had dealings with Nestle. I became a better teacher. Why would they use ingredient A instead of B? So I will still say everything depends on government in terms of policy support. Because if we have all these things and the platform is not there to encourage, we will just have most of our ideas on the shelf. Finally, that's the reason why cassava bread will not flow if we still encourage people to bring in wheat, and even at times they give them, excise duty incentives.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so very much. It's important that these points be made again and again. I have argued, for example, that we should change the idea of local governments from political units to economic units and call them local development areas, and that the fundamental orientation should be about creating, production capacity. I have also argued in a similar vein that education should be localized such that if there is an endowment, a local endowment, we grow sesame seed here. From primary one, the teaching, the curriculum should reflect how you can profit from the sesame seed value chain. So that the kids, as they are growing up, they are getting, by the time they're in secondary school, they can set up a business already around sesame seeds. These ideas are there, and we just need to be more intense. I don't know if it's politic to say, I have just been visited, just before this program started, I was visited by Senator Ibrahim Shekarau. And part of the point of our conversation is that we need to seed political culture with people who think differently. The Ondo State Governor is my schoolmate. He was a year my junior in Loyola College in Ibadan. When he was elected, I drove to him and I said to him, look, this is the way you should think in running a place like this. Take 1,000 hectares, break it into 1 hectare, so young graduates, this, that. He said, yes, it's a good idea. But I don't know what eats up this system. We need to all be active in speaking up to affect political culture. No economy grows unless it produces. You can get oil revenue and keep sharing. In the long run, all you do is make poverty sustainable. That's the only thing that can come from revenue sharing. We must produce. And that production culture must come from local government all the way to the top. And the greater emphasis should be local government. That's my personal distinct. Sambo Ingawa. I think
yes.
Aribisala wants to make a comment after that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Something go here, sir. Thank you, sir. I've been trying to come on video, but can I go ahead without video?
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. This is a very important discourse. Really, when it comes to industrialization or any economic initiative in this country, it's not, I would say, for lack of effort or lack of desire to get it right. But however, over the years, in fact, over decades, the problem seems to be, in some of our opinions, as identifying what is right. And I think this is where the the educated sector, in my opinion, has actually needs to do more. Now, when it comes to, for instance, Professor Elemo has spoken very well about the linkage between academia, research, industry, and extending it to the markets. Actually, this issue is not about the technology, much as it is important, but it's more about the capacity of the value chains to really be competitive enough to pay up all the operators and participants within a particular value chain such that it is worthwhile to continue and sustain and innovate and continue growing the sector or value chain or activities. Fundamentally in Nigeria, manufacturing, industry, agriculture, and indeed any other productive sector that is concerned with value added has been compromised through misadventure of the kind of policies that we pursued since the early days of oil boom. Some of us think, sir, that it is the direct Naironization of the oil revenue that is at the root of the distortions that we see within the economic sector that distorts market incentives here, not government external incentives, market organic incentives within the market that actually create barriers in terms of rates of return and benefits that an operator can get through the market, through the efforts of his own efforts, entrepreneurial efforts within the market to be competitive and to succeed.
I agree with you.
So the issue is, what is the real problem? You know, it is not just about cassava or soya bean or any value-added activity. It is all together. The whole Nigerian economy has been rendered uncompetitive because of that distortion, whereby rent profit is actually internal, even within the internal economy. The rent profit that we get from the alternative of doing nothing supersedes the amount you can get in terms of rate of return from any value-added activity. And when it comes to the external competitiveness of our industry, because of the hyperinflation that has been created by this fiscal misadventure, you cannot compete when it comes to globalized, commoditized sectors of manufacturing or agriculture or any other productive sector. So this is the bane of Nigerian industrialization.
Well, thank you very much.
This is the bane.
I so agree with you.
This is the bane of Nigerian economic competitiveness. No matter how much you cluster people at the local government level, no matter how much you give direct incentives to MSEs and other entrepreneurial operators, the distortion is so deep that, for instance, in agriculture, we have estimated that even if you gave inputs free to the average Nigerian peasant farmer, inputs, fertilizer, seeds, labor, everything free, he cannot compete with other agricultural producers across the world. Why? Because the inflationary regime has competed him out even before he starts. The same thing ditto with any secondary activity, because the linkage between agriculture and industry and the market for consumption is globally competitive. Agriculture and manufacturing today are the most commoditized sectors of the global economy. So you have to compete vigorously. So the starting point of the competition is competitiveness in fiscal programming. Our budgetary structures whereby we spuriously convert oil prices that come in dollars into naira only create hyperinflationary pressure within the internal economy that no value-added activity can compete.
I have for years argued that.
So this is the kernel. This is the kernel. Yeah. Service providers within the value chains, research, input for providers. The value chain has to be competitive enough to pay competitively. I get money much easier, faster, better doing nothing in this economy than when I get engaged in productive work. Yeah. That is the fundamental.
That is so true, but unfortunately, we've got like 5 people who have hands raised, and I have a co-host called Claire, who's also seeking to make some points from perspective of young people. let me very quickly take Shegwa Jai Kadir, then Mayan Mbok, Dr. Akin Adeoye, and Ehidu Ewerebo. I'll take 4 of them quickly, and then Claire will come in. Okay.
Okay, yes. So thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I'd like to commend your efforts and to recognize those who have spoken. There are a lot to say, but I know I have very little time.
Yes.
And so I would like to talk about what I see as the wide gap between the patient and the doctor. That is a major constraint for the manufacturing sector in Nigeria. The government in this case is the doctor. The manufacturing sector is the patient. If the two of them cannot communicate on a consistent basis, it will be difficult to address any issues. There have been so many policies that have been made. You have talked about backward integration right from independence, our attempts to grow sectorally and vertically and horizontally, but it has been very difficult. So I think there is a fundamental need to bridge this gap. In government, I remember when Professor Afolabi was head of service, we had an agreement that will allow the private sector to go into the public service, and for the public service to go into the private sector so that we can understand each other. Soon after Professor left, for God's sake, I don't know what happened, they killed it. This is very annoying. And sometimes you get discouraged when the person who is supposed to treat you of an ailment is the one that is giving you trouble. So my recommendation is that there should be a deliberate attempt to bridge the gap between policy makers in government and the private sector. This is going to allow us to allow knowledge to flow on both sides. Yeah. As a public sector person, it is not possible for you to understand industry. And you cannot shave somebody's head in his absence. You need to be able to relate with them so that you can get knowledge, so that the policy can be consistent, so that there will be diligent pursuit, so that we can be insulated from the vagaries of change in government. Because one government goes, one government comes, but the bureaucracy remains. And we should be able to forge this unity that will allow those policies to be consistent.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an important thing. Yeah, in America, I think they call it the oscillation of elites. When I was a grad student, one of my professors went off to Washington, was an assistant secretary of something. From there, he went to Wall Street, and before we knew it, I had left. He was back in academia. We need that oscillation of elites. Mustafa Jaji, who used to be in Cadbury's, his wife is the current secretary to the government or head of service, or I don't know what it is, in Lagos State, proposed a similar thing. He came to me about such an initiative to take people from the private sector, go into government, to Lagos State government, spend, I don't know, a year or something, and vice versa. Those things are so important, but we're not doing them. So anyway, we'll take Mayan Mbok.
Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, and let me thank you, Pat, for the work you're doing. And let me appreciate my mentor, Dr. Aribisala, and recognize every other person, Dr. Elemo. All has been said, but it's important for us to understand that until we do it right. For instance, we look at the cluster program. I headed the cluster, in fact, initiated and headed it in raw materials until I left. I want to say that when government formulates policies, the key stakeholders, we are blaming the local governments, administrators now, but they are not brought in at the beginning. What roles are they supposed to play? The speaker before Kadiri talked about capacities of the value chain. Who does what? It is much more than politics that made the cassava bread project fail. we had not prepared for the producing enough capacity for the high quality cassava flour for the bakers. So we need to sit down when we formulate policies. We need to study it from the beginning to the end, and to ensure that we know who monitors, who does what. And I want to also say that even the parastatals, they operate as silos. We're still talking about FIIR. We're still talking about RMRDC. And we're getting, their mandates are all mixed up. We're talking about how does FIIR impact Nigeria to become an industrial nation? How has RMRDC done that with all the work? Let's leave, this is what we've achieved. Let's now look at the impact. What strategy should we now use to ensure that what we have done is being seen on the ground in the local governments?
Absolutely.
And I would love to be part of that discussion in the next one when we're discussing strategy.
Yes, the next one, 2 weeks from today, will be a really high-powered one again, because my friend Kande Yumkela did so much work at UNIDO on these matters. And Kande
yes, I work with him too.
You work with Kande, okay, right. I think that we really need to shape policy properly and get passionate involvement of everybody, because it's our country that is at stake. And maybe it is a point to bring Claire in. Is their future? They are the next generation. They are the ones that we need to get this place ready for them to be competitive as a global economy. Yes, Claire, the perspective of the...
Good afternoon, everybody. Really enjoyed the conversation so far, but a particular point that Chief Osunkeye kind of raised was this notion that Agric is something that obviously we've talked about for generations and for a long time, that has large potential for Nigeria, but that the youths don't have the right perspective towards it. I think in terms of manual labor, I can agree. However, he raised this point that there should be a separation between leaving technological advancement to the huge companies like Nestle, vis-a-vis those on the ground, supporting our SMEs to really focus on, on-ground agriculture. In the generation just above me, those who are 25 to just about 30, they have really pushed in the agri sector in technological development. They are doing a lot of little things that either larger companies are adopting and are really accelerating growth there, both in Nigeria and outside. But in manufacturing, and particularly manufacturing goods, there's been a lot more, as Dr. Aribisala stated, capital is a huge roadblock there. And there are lots of youths actually trying to implement technical development in general manufacturing, leaving agri behind for a second, that have encountered roadblocks. How do we enable youths who, let's say, have gone to school abroad and come back and are looking to develop within the country, support them maybe with capital or policy, in order to use technological advancements? Because agri, whilst important, is not all that there is. And if we have the ability and the desire to work in a specific area to improve manufacturing, let's say towards producing luggage locally, I know someone who's actually doing that. How do we support youths to do that, as opposed to necessarily a huge focus on agri? Because we do have some interest, it just may not be where you prefer it.
Yeah, the economic growth depends on where the trends are and how the value chains compete globally. Access to finance clearly is an issue that keeps coming up around here, and we need to retool, as far as I'm concerned, the financial system. But this is not, we don't have the time to go into the details of this. I have argued through the years, turning back to Ragaram Rajan and Luigi Zingales, who work about why entrepreneurship grows faster in a place like the United States, because of the kinds of institutional financial base. You can go to a search fund where you live in Philadelphia, and you can actually have a story from your school, from Wharton, of somebody who went to a search fund and built a whole new business. Ian Macmillan, who used to be director of the Snyder Center there at Wharton, told me this story 20-something years ago. You can't do that in Nigeria. You can't do it in many places. So, but that's part of the institutional build-up we have to push for our economy to grow. Anyway, let's take Dr. Akin Adeoye.
Yeah, good day, Pat.
Good
and
day.
thank you very much. Yeah, good day, Pat. I hope.
Yes, that's fine. Please go ahead.
You are doing a very, very good job, and I want to appreciate you. I want to thank Dr. Aribisala for inviting me to this thing. I've done some considerable work with Kola on cluster development. But on the issue we are discussing today, I believe that the policies, when they started, they were right and they were working well. But at a particular stage, when leadership changed, because of favoritism and all these many things you put into selection in Nigeria, we don't get the right people to continue. So we are not consistent in it. Another issue I believe that has been a problem has been that the research, FIIR is boasting of having done so many things. The research they do should be demand-based. They should have actually gone to Nestle. How can we come in to do this? When I was with the World Bank, because I served some time with NIDB, now Bank of Industry, and the World Bank, a company came to us and was seeking to know how they can minimize the waste that they generate from perishable things in pineapple, oranges, and so on, so that they can improve their thing. So the demand for research should come from industry to the research institutes, and not research institutes listing several things they have done and thinking that this should be commercialized.
Yeah, push and pull, for how we go. The demand is being pushed from FIIR, whereas the idea is that they pull from
industry,
commercial players. But I think a mix of both can be useful. The key is for us to move with passion and determination. Here do Iwerebo.
Hello.
Yes.
Well,
Professor Werebo.
Yes.
Okay. Please go ahead.
I'm grateful to take care of this in this panel. I think you are doing a great job for our people at this time when there's no discussion on national level on national development. A lot has been said already about how we got where we are today. I take a slightly different approach. I think that historically, we have to look at the policies that we took and why it didn't work. For example, import substitution and backward integration. What strikes me in my work is that Nigeria and Africa didn't take it to the conclusion. Countries like India and Pakistan made sure that they developed on two legs. They developed the raw materials and the technology for the raw materials. So when they develop, they have the technical capacity to do it. In our own case, despite the effort of RMRDC under Aribisala and Elemo, there's no commitment in Nigeria, a Nigerian state, to develop Nigerian indigenous technology, because it pays more to import inputs. So I'm saying that at one level, the problem we have is actually one of psychological and political commitment to development. We don't have that. Secondly, the context of the Nigerian economy is not owned by Nigerians. It's owned by foreign companies which have an interest in sabotaging the Nigerian economy. All they do is to make sure that they sabotage whatever Nigerian government does. As you can see, apart from Nestle, we can show many examples like that. For example, I read 2 years ago that Star Beer, which has been in the process of trying to get raw materials since since Shagari's period in 1984, is still trying to get raw materials, which means he's not really committed to it.
But to be fair, Mr. Hiwere, who was on last week, told the story of how he went to The Hague and made a presentation to his people about backward integration. They told him it was going to be very hard, but they worked at it and they achieved it.
They have not achieved it anyway.
They achieved it. Nigeria changed policy. So you've got to see how we have to develop these things. We need a national elite on the one hand that is patriotic. We also need to look at how incentives play in getting people who bring capital to develop local industry so that there's a win-win in the whole process. But I know I have your book, and we'll have some opportunity to talk about this sometime. Jeremiah Iyambo, we have to be rounding up shortly.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for all your contributions. I wouldn't go into the policy, the leadership, and the incentive structure issues. I will talk more from a behavioral and data access issue. So when one of the panelists talked about the amount of work that industrial research has contributed, but my concern is that I wouldn't expect people to be able to consume the insight from all the industrial research that has been done so far, mainly because typically I wouldn't expect people to have the technical know-how to be able to make good use of that research. And I'm more concerned about people's ability to be able to access the information or the insight from the research, and also the access and use of data, especially put in a format in such a way that people can easily consume them. So if if industry or if the Institute for Research is doing so much work in these areas of producing research, to what extent is work being done to make the insight and the findings accessible in a way that people, entrepreneurs, and people in the same industry can access this information, make good use of it, and take action based on the insight that that is being offered. So I think that would be my
Thank you very much. Because we have to begin to close, I'm going to invite each of the panelists, beginning with Chief Osunkeye, to give a last thoughts, 1 minute closing thought on any subject of the whole conversation. Chief Osunkeye.
Thank you. In my closing thoughts, I want to link, there's some synergistic idea. Prof, you mentioned that government should acquire 1,000 hectares. Maybe I would suggest in every local government, parcel them out 1 hectare and give to the youths. Yeah. That's one recommendation. I will, however, suggest that the land clearing should be that of government responsibility, because no youth or we have the money to do this land clearing.
I suggested to the Ondo governor a farm management company, even get some guys from South Africa and provide support services for these 500 or however undergraduates that would have these 1 hectare farms. Give them that support, yes.
Okay, to link it up with that in place, Professor Gloria Elemo mentioned that there is a book showing the areas of competencies in agriculture in all the 774 local governments. I would suggest, and before making the suggestion, about 2 months ago, there was a webinar by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, at which the Vice President, Professor Shibajo, participated, when I asked a question about what will happen in these 774 local governments that they wanted to support. And he mentioned it will be basically agriculture and construction. Let's take, for instance, agriculture. If each local government, every local government takes 1,000 hectares and does a land clearing, and now invites 1,000 as the government intended to go into farming, knowing that the land has been cleared, I think we shall be talking now of linkages about SMEs, which is dear to my heart and dear to the heart of Dr. Remi Aribisala. And if we link all this together, that will be my own take this afternoon, that Dr. or Professor Elemo should please send her book to the Vice President, or give the book to Professor, to send to the Vice President, copy the Minister of State for Labor, I think it's Mr. Elemo, Mr. Keyamo, SAN, because he is in charge of the 774 local governments to fill up with employees of 1,000 per local government. I think we'll be making progress, because the work has been done by FIIR in this 774 local governments, where each local government has a competitive advantage in agriculture. So they don't have to go and reinvent. They can just pick up from there, but the government should do the land clearing. I think that will be my own sort of contribution to wrap up. I remember Professor Jide Elemo said universities of technology are now general universities. It is a shame. So is this with also universities of agriculture. A few years ago, they mentioned that they become general universities and they be studying law. University of Agriculture going into law faculty. Whereas the students in universities of agriculture, at least the one I know in Abeokuta, they don't do, I may be wrong, but they don't do any serious farming, and yet they have about 10,000 hectares of land, which are being encroached upon. So they should start that students who go to universities of agriculture, by the time they are coming out after 3 or 4 years, they should know how to plant what is good for the society to do, not just go and study academic subjects. That is why we call them University of Agriculture. They should come out and be agriculturalists and farmers, not people looking for employment in the banks and financial services. I'd like to rest my case there. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Aribisala. You need to unmute. You're still not, you're still muted.
So I'm saying that I'll continue with the SME, and I believe Pat should use his network to ensure that a platform is created that will be able to help the local government. It's one thing for local government to want to do it. Another thing is for them to have a policy framework within which they will be able to have idea of what to do. Because local government is money they will see. They don't see anything more than money. They need to know there must be a policy framework. There must be a guideline that guide them in setting up industrial clusters for small enterprises. And this must include providing funds and also technological enhancement, either from university, from research institution, from any other place. Then we need to also stress developing industry that has competitive power. If Lagos State does not have competitive power for agribusiness, they have for tourism and they have for trading. Because that's the failure of clusters. Start from all the states now have a bandwagon sense. All the 774 local government, without knowing the depth of the source. Even oil finishes in a number of years. All of them will rush into the same. So we need to also be key to ensure that there is industry that has competitive power is what local government gets into. And they should develop potentially those competitive industries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Elemo.
Thank you, Pat. It's quite an interesting day. I just want to make some little corrections. Dr. Adioye mentioned FIIR just pushing out research. If you have been very watchful of my words, because time does not permit one to talk about the whole process of commercialization from conception. I talked about market-driven research. These are based on surveys of industries and needs, and even government need, or even population needs. For instance, the development of a nutraceutical for the management of sickle cell anemia, which is based on food supplement that has been developed and patented. Local industries are already picking up this technology for market. This has shown at molecular level that it is about 98% efficient, especially in the management of sickle cell anemia, and is just a supplement. So that is an example of a need of the society, and this was quickly picked up by local industry. So actually all of the technology that is worked on in FIIR are not just technology or research that are developed based on just out of the blues researches, but they have been market-driven because of the need, or we call them need-driven researches. I also want to react to Jeremiah talking about the technical skill. The entrepreneurship program at the Federal Institute of Industrial Research is very, very buoyant. We have an extension and linkage unit, which was established fully when I was the Director General. And the whole idea was to be able to translate and make this technology easy for the people we are training. Also, because we include local machinery, which is fabricated, we work in a team at the FIIR. It is worked as a team, the scientists, the engineers, and you have the marketers. So it's a whole stream. As the researchers are developing, you find that the engineers are following closely and also developing the same, developing equipment that can process the materials into the final product. And you have the marketers. Feasibility reports are done along, and the viability of such researches are passed through pilot plants. And recently also, we have the model plants, like what was at the RMRDC, where you find that those technologies, after leaving pilot plants, are actually set up as demonstration plants in different local government areas. For instance, in Owode, we have a full cassava processing plant there. In Nkalagu, in the east, we have full cassava processing. In Kano, we have tomato processing, all based on FIIR technology and FIIR output. To make this awareness, just like we said, a lot of fund is needed. And especially our target is for the youth. Just before I left as the Director General, I set up what is known as the FIIR TV reality show. Distinguished members of this panel, it was an expensive project. And I almost ran bankrupt because we didn't have people wanting to finance it. They would rather finance the Big Brother. It was all captioned around the Big Brother concept, where we brought youth in, and we had auditions in all of the whole country based on the local government, based on the 6 geopolitical zones. And we had all this group of youth coming in right into the house. And we housed them just like Big Brother, where every day they receive lectures. They now pick a project, they go for markets, and you can imagine putting youth together, feeding them, and trying to promote their technology with an incentive of prize. So they all went out using FIIR technology, and they developed marketable, bankable research results. But where is it today? We still need to give them their money. The youth. We need to get banks of industry or agriculture to come in and take up this technology for them. And if we look at the number of youth that were stimulated during the TV reality show, we are talking of over 5,000 youth who contested. But at the end of the day, because it's technology-based, is industrial-based, is stimulating the growth of the SMEs, the interest was not as much as what you have in the Big Brother. I think this
give up. We have to keep trying.
I think this is an area part which you can
now.
also help. The FIIR should raise it up and start season 2. If we start season 2, maybe it will be more encouraged, and then we can have the youth coming in, and they can see the beauty in establishing their own industry, and then we can have more industries participating and necessary government policy joining in. I'll use this opportunity to thank NTA. NTA tried in trying to promote, but then they too were also constrained by funding to assist to blow it up to the level of what we
welcome to the club.
Thank you very much. Okay. So these are the areas of awareness we are talking about. Thank you.
We'll take Dr. Eleazu. Any closing thoughts? I'd like to apologize to Mrs. Bola Detula. I'm sure we can take her next session if she's around, because we've got to go. We've overrun by nearly 30 minutes. I'd like to appreciate very much all of our panelists and all of those who joined this. This is a continuing effort. Next, a fortnight from now, we have another session, and we have a very interesting panel. I've mentioned Dr. Kande Yunkela already. We've got Dr. Shamsuddin Usman. We've got the current man president, Chief Kola Jamodu, who had to drop out today because something happened untoward. Hopefully, he'll probably also join us. Chief Mrs. Nika Akonde will also join us as the panel for that. And we'll focus on strategy and taking all of these down from the local government to the top. And we hope and we pray that all of this conversation will lead to stimulating a new manufacturing in Nigeria that will provide the millions of jobs that our young people need and growth for the economy. Thank you all so much. Have a very pleasant week. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. I'd like to also thank our sponsors for this edition. Please join us in the next 2 weeks for our upcoming episodes, continuing our series on manufacturing.
Okay, thank you.